I'm delighted now to invite Mr. Fernando Gomez, who's the head of chemistry and advanced materials industry at the World Economic Forum, to give us that perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to take some of the concepts that my colleague Murad has illustrated on the fourth industrial revolution and share with you a number of the dimensions in which we have been looking at this from the perspective of our sector. Before I do that, I have to say thank you for this invitation. Thanks to GPCA and the visionary leadership to bring some of these ideas and really to start a dialogue on not only finding those intersections with our sector, but finding the intersections with the region and with the socioeconomic systems in which we are relevant as an industry. That will be the first point. The second is to think of the redefinition of our industry a little beyond digitalization. I think Jim Fitterling yesterday established a difference, and that is something that has been extremely important as we shape this idea of the relevance of the fourth industrial revolution for our sector, for the chemicals and materials sector. And I want to go back to two of those challenges that were already illustrated by Murad. One is the governance challenge, and the other is what we call the human challenge. In the end, these are important elements of our performance in the market and in front of society. I want to go back as well. I'm not going to go back as far as Murad went, thousands of years. But one of the earlier concepts that we learned studying organic chemistry is this concept of chirality. And I didn't realize how important these two hands were going to become as we think of the fourth industrial revolution and the chemical industry. Our sector is actually very well represented by this. On one side, the success of the past and the way in which we have built the role for this sector in our economy and in society. But on the other, a big question in terms of what that will be in the future if the landscape is going to be redefined. It also applies for the role that the sector plays with respect to the fourth industrial revolution. On one side, it's going to be, in a way, impacted, and will have to perform in a new landscape. But on the other, and this is often forgotten, our sector is actually enabling the fourth industrial revolution. It is largely through a number of the products, materials, services, technologies that are being developed by you that this happens. In the eyes of a polymer chemist like myself, a drone is a beautiful thing. And it is a collection of materials. Now, what we want to do is take you outside, no longer about the material and about the what, but think about the other implications around it. And I want to pull back a couple of the elements of the fourth industrial revolution and focus on two. One is, it is extremely important to characterize this as a systemic change. It is tempting to think of all these technologies in parallel, but they are much more interrelated than how we come to accept. It is largely through the progress in computing power, for example, that we've been able to take what we know in terms of some of the basic concepts of artificial intelligence or machine learning and actually deploy them in a much more functional way. So that is one element that is going to be critical for our sector. We are the sector in the middle of a number of these economic systems, and the concepts of the fourth industrial revolution are going to have to be integrated into our activity the same way that we have been able to integrate the concepts of performance in the marketplace. The second one is, this is actually happened by design, not by default. It is not something that is happening to us. And I think that goes along with the invitation that Murad has made. This is the opportunity for us to respond to the challenge and actually shape the future, as opposed to extrapolate from what has happened in the past. Many of you may have seen this photo in the news. This was about 2 months ago. And for material scientists, this is actually quite an achievement. This is a vehicle that is about 50% lighter, 40% lighter than, let's say, the average sedan out there. It's a beautiful collection of materials, and I don't need to go into the definition. These are your materials that are there. But I want to illustrate this from a slightly different perspective. What if the drivers behind the design also change? This was a response in a way to energy efficiency. Lightweight materials is something that you're all working on. And actually one of the achievements of this sector, the sustainability profile of transportation today is where it is because of the contributions that you have made through materials. But if I go back to one of those examples, and if you think of an intersection in the street, and because of artificial intelligence and smart systems, the rate of collisions in that intersection decreases significantly. Now we're going to have vehicles smartly speaking with the intersection. Now the question to all of you is, will we have the same design parameters for materials that have been operating up to now? And it's an open question. We may not have to offer the driver and the passenger the same type of protection that was considered necessary for a passenger vehicle up to now, if we can demonstrate that the environment, the landscape in which this is going to happen, is going to be significantly improved. So outside of the material world, which has been the driver for design, there will be a number of structural elements that are going to be significantly different in a not so distant future. And the question is, are we ready to understand and to incorporate those new performance parameters, new performance criteria in our product design? Similarly, this is an illustration that is now becoming quite common. This is simply the illustration of a drone delivering a package. And as I mentioned, there are a number of materials implications. There's a number of portable power implications that your organizations have already taken up. That is the first layer. But outside of this, there's another very important element, which is it's not only about the high value add, it's not only about those enabling materials that I referred to at the beginning. I want you to focus on the box. Packaging is one of those areas in which, as you perform in the market, is extremely important. But packaging will change. And if this is the way in which materials, in which packages can be delivered, are we going to go back and design the packaging for the boxes of the past? Now, this is simply an illustration, and it's happening right now. But the central idea here is only until we understand the entire environment will we be able to plan for the future. The other element is that coherence between the new and disrupting and incoming technologies and the existing technologies is going to create a new challenge. It's no longer trying to identify what will be the product of the future, of the material of the future that is going to be part of the system. It's how we're going to transition to that point that creates a new challenge for leadership. I want to take that drone and pick on the example that Murat illustrated on agriculture. And again, think of three elements that are going to be outside of the actual drone. The first one is, if we are able to incorporate some of the approaches to innovation that a number of these technologies are offering to our sector, we are going to face essentially a new toolbox on how to approach the new designs, how to approach the new set of products and technologies. Because the way in which these fast-paced technologies can be incorporated in our own innovation actually comes with that ability to prototype quickly, to learn very quickly in the field, to create new feedback loops for the intelligence that being generated by the deployment of these technologies. The second is perhaps at the business strategy level. As the landscape changes, there will be new opportunities for integration that are going to go well beyond the, let's say, the upstream or the downstream vertical channels in which this sector has been operating. When the agrochemical and the drone come together, and when you add an algorithm and data science on top of it, the possibilities for business integration are now completely different. And the third one, and it's not pointing at the drone, it is pointing at the person, it is appropriation. What good is technology and symbiotic technology if there's not a good channel to appropriate this technology and make it part of your culture? And we have come from a world in which we've been able to incorporate technology into our thinking and beyond that into our culture through people. Now, our people prepare to take that role of incorporating some of these concepts in the redefinition of our sector. If I take some examples, I won't go into a lot of detail, but this will be the second part. What then for the industry? If we think of, okay, that is happening, let's say at the systemic level, at the economic systems level, what about the industry? There will be a number of examples that are actually happening today. This is not about the future. These are a number of the deployment of these individual technologies right now, largely to production systems. I want to point out one of all those boxes, which is EH&S, Environmental Health and Safety. When we did our work with many of you, our partner organizations, in the digital transformation of the industry, EH&S was identified as one of those areas of great value to be delivered by digital technologies. Protecting an employee, saving just 1 hour, avoiding 1 LTI, is actually of high importance for this sector. Now, many of us are carrying wearable devices, and a wearable device is essentially a sensor or a collection of sensors. The connectivity of these sensors in the hand of an employee, in the hands of an operator, changes completely the landscape of the type of information that we are getting, and at some point, the relevance of this interplay of technologies for what we keep calling our most important asset across all of our organizations. There are a number of other examples. Now I want to make an introduction, not far from what Murad has illustrated. This is possibly your new materials discovery laboratory. And it looks very different than your current new materials laboratory in many cases. And if the work of Professor Alain Aspuru at the University of Toronto and many of his colleagues is successful, that previous picture of the new materials laboratory is not going to be a distant reality. The combination of machine learning, AI, and robotics has already demonstrated the concept of a self-driving laboratory. The algorithms that can test a number of possibilities and actually synthesize them in a laboratory, learn from the experiment, and move on to the next one. It's already happening at a speed that goes beyond the speed in which myself and perhaps many of you were trained to do this in the discovery side. So for the industry, one of those areas that is right now not only ripe for a number of opportunities, but pretty much ready to offer good results is in the space of discovery and innovation. Through this work, the numbers are very similar. Our ability to go through a number of possibilities, millions of possibilities very quickly to arrive at potential candidates. The work that Alain is doing in the space of cathode materials for batteries and portable power is actually advancing very rapidly because of their ability to deploy these technologies together. When we think of technologies that enable the fourth industrial revolution, it's often tempting to think of information technologies. And information technologies are at the heart. But I also mentioned that these technologies are symbiotic and are feeding each other. And one important area is biological technologies, and perhaps an opportunity for this industry that is untapped and very significant. More than what can be done with gene editing today, the question is, what if the landscape in which the deployment of these technologies is significantly different? The illustration of the CRISPR babies is actually one that is happening right now. But will anybody care if the biofuel that is burned in a combustion engine comes from a genetically modified organism? It creates a different type of governance challenge, but there was a time when there were very significant challenges on the technology side to deploy biotechnology to materials and fuels. And at this speed, it won't be that long before this second question is a question of the past. We may remember the time when bioprocesses faced tremendous technological challenges and couldn't be scaled up. Biotechnology and the combination with information technology is now essentially creating new fields. And the fields of bioinformatics and now cheminformatics for us exist as disciplines. And I don't know how many of you have been trained as bioinformaticians or cheminformaticians, but this is the moment when information technology becomes at the heart of discovery. Now, I also wanted to do a reverse Slido. Many of you may recognize this photo. This photo is from Professor Francis Arnold, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2018. And the award was given because of her work in evolution and deploying some of the concepts of evolution to finding enzymes that perform chemical transformations that were inaccessible to bioenzymatic routes. Now, the award is because of the concept, but this is another important element of our ability to understand the importance of 4IR technologies. Their ability to go through evolutionary cycles right now is extremely high because of the deployment of these technologies. So What the 4IR enabling technologies are giving our sector is now an opportunity to think of these processes that were extremely lengthy and go and deploy some of the concepts that were considered outside of our normal delivery to very particular problems in the space of innovation and discovery. At the same time, this is happening and not too far from here. One of the perhaps strongest definition of our own sector is sustainability, and many of the speakers yesterday made this parallel. Probably the greatest challenge that we face today is in the space of circular economy. Now, this is a sector that has responded and has enabled many other sectors to achieve their sustainability targets. Yet, we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of work to do with others. How, then, can the fourth industrial revolution technologies impact this space? There are a couple of illustrations. The first one is materials traceability, and that will not be the case for every molecule, in particular for many of the substances that are produced right now in your organizations. But in terms of rule of origin, in terms of being able to understand where many of our products are, this is probably going to be one of those opportunities for the sector. The second is on, and I think this is a great power on this, is the deployment of data to life cycle analysis. The way in which we perform LCA today is built on a number of assumptions. And at some point, we are going to be able to understand the role of that entire wealth of data to increase our accuracy in life cycle analysis. And the third one is consumer empowerment. And this is well beyond the participation of people in social media. This is actually your customers, and their customers being able to access a reliable and a credible source of information in terms of the decisions that they make and where they deploy their interests as consumers. Let's move to the governance challenge for a couple of minutes. I know the CRISPR babies are right now in the headlines of many publications, but I want to go back a couple of years. There was a story 2 years ago, 2016, a researcher applying CRISPR technology to greens, so vegetable seeds, growing them in his backyard outside and preparing a meal, eating the meal, documenting the entire process, and submitting the doc to the Swedish authorities to ask if this process was within or outside of GMO regulation. At that time in 2016, the Swedish authorities didn't really have a full reference to understand whether this was within or outside of GMO. 2 years later, the European Union, so this was July of this year, the European Union determined that genetically engineered through CRISPR organism actually fell within the regulation. This actually is possibly a counterexample of a regulation that moved fast enough, and this is still in the process of years. Many organizations, many countries are still debating whether GMO yes, GMO no. And the reality is that technologies are moving way, way faster than that. Now, this is an area that is full of regulation, food and agriculture, not as regulated as healthcare, but perhaps less regulated than other spaces in which there is a very strong need for all of us to co-design as opposed to wait for that regulation to happen and be imposed. I said a couple times that one of the characteristics of this fourth industrial revolution is that these technologies are symbiotic and interconnected. Now, that is true for many of the elements in the entire system. So it's not only technologies. This is now when the interplay of a good governance systems, good policy structures, the work that you do in innovation and R&D, the understanding of customers that you do through your day-to-day work need to come together more than ever before for your organizations and for our entire sector to continue performing and delivering the social and economic value that has delivered up to now. In the end, there is an element at the heart of our organizations, and many of you see yourselves reflected on the screen. And this is no difference for the fourth industrial revolution. Actually, humans are at the center of the fourth industrial revolution. So this gap between humans and technology is something that probably by itself will continue to grow. And what we want to do is to work with you in understanding the new role that humans will play in this new landscape. It is through partnerships, it is through relationships, it is through intimacy that we've been able to achieve a lot and to deliver a lot of value. But it takes a long time, it's a very difficult process to get to a real understanding of corporate culture and the role that we need to play in society. Now, valued employees and employees with values, with principles, are more than ever before going to be important in the definition of those algorithms and those new landscape in which the industry performs. The responsibility that has been given to employees all over continues in the fourth industrial revolution. If that is true, there's one important element here, and this is the last one that I'll make on the human side. It also requires perhaps a new type of leadership. And this is a call for all of you to think of if the landscape is going to change, if the role of the industry is going to change, if the role of the employees are going to change, will the role of leadership change? And I'm going to leave that as an open question for you. The last thing that I will ask is, think of your organizations right now. Think of those disruptive solutions that are being worked out in your laboratories. And take a step back and ask yourselves if the environment for them, if the regulatory frameworks, if the policy frameworks are in place. Because if they're not, it is already getting a little late to work with them, to work on them. As an organization, we'll be very happy to work with you in defining those where they don't exist. So thank you so much again for this opportunity.